He always thought the old apartment was ordinary, small, a little creaky, the kind of place you rent when you're just trying to get by. But that night, when Daniel pushed aside a box of winter coats in his closet, his hand brushed against something strange. The wall didn't feel like plaster, it felt hollow. A loose panel shifted with a soft thud, and for the first time, he noticed a thin line of air seeping through the crack. Most people would have ignored it. Daniel didn't. With a nervous breath, he pried the panel open and found himself staring into a pitch-black space that shouldn't exist. A hidden room, wedged between his apartment and the one next door. He reached for his phone flashlight, and the beam cut through the darkness. What he saw made his chest tighten. There was furniture inside, an old mattress on the floor, a pile of neatly folded clothes, and even a mug with the faint stain of coffee around its rim. This wasn't just an abandoned crawl space. Someone had been living there. Maybe still was. The thought sent a chill crawling up his spine. Every sound of the building suddenly felt louder. The hum of the pipes, the creak of the floorboards, the faint shuffle in the hallway outside. Had he heard those noises before? Had he brushed them off as normal? Daniel stepped further inside, scanning the walls. Strange markings were scratched into the plaster, like tallies or symbols. And tucked in the corner was something worse, a notebook. Its cover was worn, its pages stuffed with hurried handwriting. He picked it up with trembling hands, flipping to the first page. The words froze him. They weren't random notes. They were about him, his daily routine, the times he left for work, what groceries he bought, even who he called at night. Someone had been watching him, closely enough to know everything. His breath caught when the sound of floorboard groaned behind him. He wasn't alone. Daniel froze, his phone light trembling in his hand. The sound behind him was faint, just a board settling, maybe, but in that hidden room, surrounded by evidence of someone else's life, it felt like a warning. He didn't dare turn around right away. Instead, he listened. The silence pressed against his ears, thick and heavy, like the whole apartment was holding its breath. He backed out slowly, his heart pounding so hard it echoed in his chest. Closing the panel again felt impossible. What if whoever lived there came back while he was blocking the only exit? But leaving it open meant admitting the truth, that someone had been watching, recording, possibly living less than a wall's width away from him. Daniel had lived in the apartment for 2 years. He'd always brushed off the little oddities, the groceries that seemed out of place in the fridge, the faint smell of cigarette smoke when he'd never smoked a day in his life, the times he swore he'd locked his door but found it slightly ajar. He told himself it was his imagination, that he was tired, stressed, maybe even paranoid. But now, staring at that notebook, he knew he hadn't been imagining anything. Someone had been slipping in and out, documenting his life like it was a diary. His thoughts raced back to when he first moved in. The landlord had been too eager to rent it out, almost rushing him through the paperwork. The neighbors kept to themselves, their doors always shut, their eyes avoiding his in the hallway. He remembered one night, just a few months ago, when he woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of breathing near his bed. He laughed it off then, convincing himself it was a dream. Now, that memory made his skin crawl. The conflict inside him was sharp. Should he call the police? What would he even say? That he found a secret room? That someone was living there? The notebook alone was enough to prove his claim. But what if the person who wrote it wasn't gone? What if they were still nearby, waiting, watching? His flashlight beam swept across the symbols carved into the wall again. They weren't just random scratches. Some looked like dates, others like initials. Was this person keeping track of time? Of victims? The thought clawed at the edges of his mind. Daniel clutched the notebook to his chest and finally turned back toward the closet door, his hand shaking as he reached for the handle. But before he could step out, something caught his eye. The mattress wasn't empty anymore. It had an impression, like someone had just been lying there. Daniel couldn't move. His light trembled over the mattress, locked on the fresh indentation. It was impossible to ignore now. Someone had been there moments before. Maybe they were still in the room, hiding just beyond his narrow beam. The claustrophobic air pressed against his lungs, making it hard to breathe. His instinct screamed to run, but his pride, his stubborn refusal to believe he'd been powerless in his own home, rooted him to the spot. He gripped the notebook tighter. He should call the police. But what if they laughed at him? A hidden room, strange scratches, a mattress. It all sounded like paranoia. And Daniel had a history with paranoia. A year ago, after a bad breakup, he'd spiraled, seeing shadows where there were none, accusing his ex of spying, even checking his locks 5 times before bed. Friends drifted away, convinced he was unstable. He'd finally started rebuilding his life, and the last thing he wanted was to hand everyone proof that maybe they'd been right about him all along. Still, the evidence was undeniable. Whoever had been living here knew everything about him. He flipped through more pages of the notebook, his throat dry. The entries grew darker the further he read. No longer simple notes about his groceries or calls. They became personal. He cried tonight. He thinks no one hears. Another page. He's loneliest around midnight. That's when he's weakest. The words blurred as Daniel realized. This wasn't just observation. This was intimacy, obsession. His phone buzzed suddenly, nearly making him drop it. A text from his landlord. "Everything okay? Heard some noise from your unit." Daniel's stomach twisted. He hadn't told the landlord about the discovery yet. How did he know to check now? The timing felt too perfect, too coincidental. A new possibility sank in. What if the landlord knew about this room? Maybe he'd built it. Maybe he'd been renting both spaces, one official, one secret. That would explain the rush to get Daniel signed on, the way he avoided questions about the building's age or layout. The air grew colder. He could swear he felt eyes on him, though the room was still. He shone his light toward the corner, half expecting to see a figure crouched there. Nothing. Still, his gut screamed he wasn't alone. His moral dilemma gnawed at him. Confront the landlord and risk everything, or keep quiet and live with the knowledge that someone had been inches away from him night after night. Worse, what if the person wasn't gone? What if they were only waiting for him to let his guard down? Daniel slid the notebook into his jacket, determination flickering under his fear. If he couldn't trust the police, and he couldn't trust the landlord, he'd have to find out the truth himself. But as he stepped out of the hidden room, his light swept across the closet door one last time, and there, scratched into the wood at eye level, were 3 words that hadn't been there before. "I see you." Daniel staggered back from the closet door, his eyes locked on the words etched into the wood. "I see you." His throat tightened. He hadn't heard anyone scratching. No sound of carving, which meant whoever had written it was fast and close. Maybe still there. His flashlight beam shook wildly as he swept it across the room again. Nothing. Only the mattress, the mug, the carve markings. But his body told him otherwise. The hair on his neck rose, every instinct screaming that he was being watched. He slammed the panel shut, chest heaving. His apartment suddenly felt hostile, every shadow sharper, every creak louder. His phone buzzed again. Another text from the landlord. "Are you sure everything's okay? Wanting to come check." Daniel's fingers hovered over the keyboard. If the landlord was involved, calling him over could be a trap. If he wasn't, maybe he was the only one Daniel could trust. He typed, erased, typed again. No answer felt safe. The notebook in his jacket seemed heavier now, like it was burning a hole straight through him. He couldn't shake the words inside. How personal they'd been, how invasive. Whoever wrote them hadn't just been watching. They understood him in a twisted, intimate way. Worse, they seemed to know what he would do before he did it. A sudden noise jolted him, the soft rattle of his doorknob turning. Daniel froze. It was slow, deliberate, like someone testing the lock. He backed away, gripping his phone, but the screen went black. Dead battery. His only light flickered out. Darkness swallowed the apartment. He felt his way toward the kitchen drawer, fumbling for anything sharp. The scraping sound of metal on wood echoed as the knob jiggled again, harder this time. His chest tightened with panic. He pressed himself against the wall, straining to listen. Then silence. The quiet was worse. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Daniel couldn't tell. He forced himself to peek through the peephole. The hallway looked empty, dimly lit by the flickering bulb overhead. But in that half-light, he thought he saw a shape lingering just outside the frame. Someone standing close enough to know he was looking. His pulse hammered. He stumbled back, trying to steady his breathing. His mind replayed the tally marks in the hidden room. Were they days? Victims? Or warnings? The weight of paranoia crushed him. If he left the apartment, he risked walking straight into whoever was out there. If he stayed, he might already be trapped with them inside. He reached for his jacket pocket, pulling the notebook free, flipping quickly through the pages in the dark. His eyes adjusted enough to catch scrawled ink near the end. A final entry. He'll discover the truth tonight. He'll open the door at 12:47. Daniel's heart dropped. He looked at the clock on his stove. 12:46. The clock blinked 12:46. Daniel's hand shook as he flipped through the notebook again, his eyes locked on the final line. He'll open the door at 12:47. The doorknob rattled once more. Louder this time. Urgent. Daniel raised the knife, his breath shallow. He couldn't tell if he was preparing to defend himself or if fear alone was holding him upright. Every second stretched like a lifetime. 12:47 was only heartbeats away. Then, 3 hard knocks. Not random. Rhythmic. Like a signal. Against every instinct, Daniel crept back to the peephole. His stomach twisted when he saw who stood outside. Not a stranger. Not a faceless figure. It was his landlord. The man's expression looked oddly calm, almost expectant. His lips moved like he was whispering something, though Daniel couldn't hear through the thick door. Relief tried to push through his fear, but suspicion held it back. The timing, the texts, the secret room, the notebook. None of it was coincidence. Daniel's phone, dead moments ago, lit up suddenly in his hand. The screen glowed with a single notification, an unread message already open. His blood ran cold as he read it. Don't trust him. He's not who he says he is. The sender had no name, no number, just blank. Daniel stumbled back, panic flooding him. Someone else was involved. Someone who knew what was happening inside this building and was close enough to hijack his phone. But were they warning him or controlling him? The doorknob twisted hard. The landlord's voice finally cut through, muffled but firm. Daniel, open up. I need to explain. You found something you shouldn't have. Every word felt like a threat. Daniel gripped the knife tighter. Should he trust the landlord and demand answers? Or was the warning right? That opening the door meant stepping straight into the trap? The clock blinked 12:47. Daniel froze as the notebook slipped from his hand, falling open on the floor. His eyes widened at the new page revealed. One he swore hadn't been there before. Fresh ink. Still wet. He'll make the wrong choice. The handwriting was different from the rest. Daniel's chest heaved. Someone was writing in the notebook right now. Inside the apartment. Daniel's breath came in ragged bursts as the landlord's voice pressed through the door. You're in danger, Daniel. Let me in. Now. The notebook lay open at his feet, the wet ink glistening like a wound. He'll make the wrong choice. Every part of him screamed to run, but where? The hidden room was a trap. The hallway could be worse. The knob twisted again. Hard. This time the door shuddered under the pressure. Daniel's grip tightened on the knife. Stay away, he shouted, his voice cracking. Silence. Then, calmly, the landlord replied, I wasn't the one living there, but I know who was. And he's still inside. Daniel's stomach dropped. His eyes darted to the closet. The sealed panel seemed to throb in the shadows, as if the air itself was shifting around it. He remembered the indentation on the mattress, the breathing in the night, the scratches on the wall. Someone else was here. A sharp thud echoed from the closet. Then another, scraping, clawing. The panel rattled violently, as if something or someone was trying to push out. Daniel's paralysis broke. He lunged for the door, yanking it open. The landlord stumbled inside, grabbing him by the shoulders. His face was pale, sweating, but his eyes burned with urgency. You shouldn't have stayed here alone. I tried to warn you. The closet panel splintered with a crack. Both men turned as it burst open. From the darkness crawled a figure, gaunt, filthy, eyes wide and unblinking. The intruder's hair hung in greasy clumps, his fingernails torn to the quick, his face contorted in a twisted grin. He wasn't just a squatter. He looked at Daniel like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. The landlord shoved Daniel behind him, raising a crowbar he'd carried under his coat. He's been in the walls for years, the landlord hissed. I try to keep it contained. but he fixated on you. The intruder lunged. The apartment erupted in chaos, metal clashing, bodies crashing against walls, guttural screams echoing through the room. Daniel's knife slipped from his shaking hand as he scrambled for the notebook. He didn't know why, but some instinct told him it mattered. Flipping to the last page, he froze. The handwriting shifted mid-sentence, like it was being written in real time. He survives only if... The pen line stopped abruptly, smudged. Daniel looked up. The landlord was on the ground, blood pooling around his head. The intruder stood over him, chest heaving, eyes locked on Daniel. And then, without warning, the intruder spoke. His voice was hoarse but eerily familiar. "You shouldn't have opened the closet. I told you not to." Daniel's skin went cold. The voice wasn't just familiar. It was his own. The intruder grinned wider, baring teeth, before whispering, "I see you." The lights in the apartment flickered once and went out, leaving only the glow of the clock, 12:48. Daniel sat in the wreckage of his apartment, the silence pressing in like heavy walls. The closet door hung broken, the secret room exposed for what it truly was, an ugly scar in the middle of his life. The landlord's body had already been taken away, carried out under a sheet, his final words echoing in Daniel's ears. I tried to keep it contained. But the worst part wasn't the blood or the destruction. It was the memory of the intruder's face. The way his grin had mirrored Daniel's own. The way his voice sounded like a distorted reflection of his. As if the stranger in the walls hadn't been just watching him, but becoming him. The police asked questions. He answered as best he could, but the details never came out right. A hidden room. A double. A notebook that wrote itself. His words sounded like fragments of a nightmare, something that didn't belong in the light of day. They gave him sympathetic nods, but he could see the doubt behind their eyes. Another paranoid tenant. Another broken mind. Still, Daniel knew what he had seen. The notebook was proof, even if no one else would believe it. When he picked it up again, the last words still chilled him. "I see you." But beneath the ink stains, he noticed something else. Old words, faintly scratched into the paper, like someone had tried to erase them. "Stop living like a ghost." The phrase cut deep. For years, Daniel had lived in isolation, haunted by failed relationships, mistrust, loneliness. He had been a spectator in his own life, watched, studied, but never truly living. Maybe that's why the intruder had chosen him. Maybe obsession finds its way to those who already feel invisible. Standing by the shattered closet, Daniel made a choice. He would leave the apartment, yes, but not just the apartment. He would leave the version of himself that lived in fear, in hiding, in silence. Whoever or whatever had been in that room, it fed on his emptiness. And he was done feeding it. As dawn light filtered through the blinds, Daniel stepped outside with nothing but a small bag and a notebook. The city felt different, louder, sharper, alive. For the first time, he didn't feel like a shadow among strangers. He felt real. He glanced once more at the notebook before tucking it away. The last line glowed faintly in the sun, almost as if changing. "Live before you're only remembered." Daniel let out a shaky breath, a small, bittersweet smile pulling at his lips. "Maybe I will," he whispered. And with that, he walked into the day, no longer a ghost in his own story.